The letter was written in blood. Kurt Cobain stared at the crumpled envelope in his hands, trying to process what security had just handed him backstage. The ink was rusty brown, dried, but unmistakably organic. His name was spelled out in careful, childlike letters across the front. Kurt Cobain, please read before you go on stage. Outside, the Chicago venue thrummed with anticipation. Snow pounded against the windows of the converted warehouse, trapping 300 grunge kids inside with nothing but beer, cigarettes, and the promise of music loud enough to drown out their demons. But Kurt couldn't move. He stood frozen in the narrow hallway that served as a backstage area, studying the envelope like it might explode. "You gonna open it or what?" Chris called from the makeshift dressing room where he was tuning his bass. "We're on in 5 minutes." Kurt's fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope. The letter inside was written on notebook paper, torn from a spiral-bound book. The same rusty ink, the same careful handwriting. But it was the first line that made Kurt's blood run cold. "My name is Emma, and I am 14 years old, and my dad hurts me, and nobody believes me, and tonight I am going to make it stop forever." The backstage lights, harsh fluorescents that buzzed like trapped insects, seemed to flicker. Kurt read the letter again, slower this time, feeling his stomach clench with each word. Emma wrote about bruises hidden under long sleeves, about teachers who asked questions but never pushed for answers, about a mother who worked double shifts and came home too tired to notice, about nights when she'd put on Kurt's music through headphones, turned up so loud it drowned out the footsteps in the hallway. "Tonight is my last concert," the letter continued. "I wanted to hear Something in the Way. One more time because it's the only song that makes me feel like someone understands. After you play it, I'm going to the bathroom, and I'm not coming back out. I just wanted someone to know why." Kurt's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the paper. At the bottom, in smaller writing, Emma had added, "P.S. I used my blood because I read somewhere that musicians respect that. I hope you don't think I'm crazy. I just needed you to take me seriously." "Kurt, let's go!" Dave shouted from behind his drum kit. "They're getting restless out there." But Kurt couldn't move. He was remembering his own childhood, his own father's fists, his own nights spent hiding in his room with a guitar as his only protection. He was remembering the songs he'd written in blood, metaphorically, but the pain was just as real. The crowd outside was getting louder, chanting for Nirvana to take the stage, but Kurt was trapped in a moment where time had stopped, where a 14-year-old girl's desperate cry for help hung in the air like smoke. That's when he made a decision that would break every rule of professional performance. Kurt walked to the stage entrance, but instead of picking up his guitar, he went straight to the microphone. The crowd erupted as he appeared, but their cheers died when they saw his face. Something was wrong. Kurt looked haunted, lost, like he'd just seen a ghost. "Before we start," Kurt said, his voice cutting through the sudden quiet, "I need to tell you about a letter I just received." He pulled the blood-stained paper from his pocket and held it up. Even from the back of the venue, people could see the dark stains on the white paper. "A girl named Emma wrote this, in her own blood, because she wanted to make sure I'd take her seriously." Kurt's voice cracked. "She's 14 years old. Her father abuses her, and she's here tonight because she plans to kill herself after our show." The venue went dead silent. Not the excited quiet before a song, but the terrible silence that comes when people realize they're witnessing something real, something that cuts deeper than entertainment. "Emma," Kurt said, scanning the crowd, "I know you're out there, and I need you to know something. I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough." He paused, collecting himself. "When I was your age, I thought music was just noise to cover up the hurt, but I learned something. Music isn't about covering up pain. It's about making pain useful." Kurt stepped to the edge of the stage, kneeling down so he was closer to eye level with the crowd. His blonde hair fell across his face, but his voice carried clear and strong. "Emma, your letter says you want to hear Something in the Way one last time. But I want to make a deal with you. I'll play it, but not as an ending. As a beginning. Because after tonight, I want you to stick around and help me write new songs. Songs about surviving, songs about fighting back, songs about making it through one more day." He scanned the crowd again, looking for any sign of recognition. "Where are you, Emma? I need to see you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Slowly, near the left side of the venue, a small hand raised. Kurt squinted through the stage lights and saw her, a tiny figure in an oversized black hoodie, tears streaming down her face. "There you are," Kurt said softly. "Can you come up here? I want everyone to meet the bravest person in this room." The crowd parted as Emma made her way to the stage, everyone understanding instinctively that something sacred was happening. When she reached the front, Kurt extended his hand and helped pull her up onto the stage. Up close, she looked even younger than 14. Her hoodie sleeves were pulled down over her hands, and Kurt could see the edge of what looked like bandages around her wrists. "Tell me your last name, Emma," Kurt said quietly, still kneeling beside her. "Rodriguez," she whispered. "Emma Rodriguez," Kurt announced to the crowd, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "The person who just taught me something about courage." He turned back to her. "Your letter says, 'Nobody believes you about your father. But I believe you. Everyone in this room believes you, and we're going to help you." Kurt stood up and faced the crowd. "I want everyone here to understand something. This isn't a concert anymore. This is an intervention. This is all of us saying to Emma that her life matters, that her story matters, that she doesn't have to carry this alone." He picked up his guitar and struck the opening chords to "Something in the Way." But before he started singing, he handed the microphone to Emma. "This is your song now," he said, "and when it's over, you're going home with people who will keep you safe. That's not a request. That's a promise." Emma stared at the microphone, then at the crowd of 300 strangers who were all focused on her with expressions of fierce protection. When she finally spoke into the mic, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the venue. "I'm scared," she said. "We know," Kurt replied, starting to strum softly, "but you're not alone anymore." What happened next wasn't a performance. It was a rescue. Kurt played "Something in the Way" while Emma stood beside him, and when the song ended, half the crowd was crying, not the cathartic tears that came from good music, but the tears that came from witnessing genuine humanity. But the night wasn't over. After Kurt handed the microphone back to Emma, something unprecedented happened. Without any prompting from him, individual audience members began walking to the edge of the stage, not rushing, not pushing, just quietly stepping forward. A college-aged girl with purple hair was the first. She rolled up her sleeves and showed Emma the scars on her arms. "Me too," she said simply. "Different situation, same pain, you're not alone." Then came a guy in a torn Soundgarden shirt who spoke about his stepfather. Another girl talked about being assaulted by a family friend. One by one, strangers became human beings with stories. The concert venue transformed into something Kurt had never seen before, a spontaneous support group bound together by shared trauma and the strange alchemy of rock music. Kurt watched in amazement as Emma, still clutching the microphone, began to respond to each person. Her fear was being replaced by something else, a recognition, the understanding that her pain wasn't unique or isolating. It was horrifically common, but in that commonality, she found strength. "This is what I've been trying to tell people," Kurt said into his guitar pickup, his voice amplifying softly through the speakers. "Music doesn't fix anything, but it shows us we're not the only broken ones." Dave Grohl, who had been silent behind his drum kit during the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "You know what? Fuck the set list." He stood up, drumsticks still in hand. "This is the most real thing I've ever been part of." Chris nodded, unplugging his bass but staying on stage. "Emma, you just did something, braver than any of us have ever done. You told the truth when it mattered most." The venue owner, a grizzled man named Tony, who'd seen everything in 30 years of running clubs, approached the stage with tears in his eyes. "Kid," he said to Emma, "you can consider this place a safe haven whenever you need one. My office door is always open." But it was what happened next that would haunt Kurt for the rest of his life, in the best possible way. Emma handed the microphone back to Kurt and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I want to sing with you, not because I'm giving up, but because I'm choosing to stay." Kurt felt something break open in his chest, not the familiar fracture of pain, but something different, something like hope cracking through concrete. "What do you want to sing?" he asked. "Something new," Emma said. "Something that doesn't exist yet, something about surviving." So Kurt began to play, no specific song, just chords. simple, clean notes that filled the space between heartbeats, and Emma began to hum along, finding her voice in the spaces between his guitar strings. What emerged wasn't a song anyone would ever record. It was too raw, too imperfect, too real, but it was theirs. Emma's voice, scratchy from crying and small from fear, somehow harmonized with Kurt's damaged vocal cords and the distant hum of amplifiers. The crowd joined in, not with words but with sounds, humming, breathing, the shuffle of feet and the clink of bottle caps. It became a collective exhale, a shared recognition that sometimes survival sounds like music, and sometimes music sounds like survival. After the show, if it could still be called a show, Kurt didn't leave until Emma was safe. He called the police himself, gave them the letter as evidence, and stayed until Child Protective Services arrived. The venue owner gave them a quiet room where Emma could wait, and Kurt sat with her, not saying much, just being present. "Why did you help me?" Emma asked as they waited. Kurt thought about it for a moment. "Because someone should have helped me when I was your age. Because music isn't just about making noise, it's about making sure nobody has to hurt alone." But then, Emma asked something that caught him off guard. "What happens now, after tonight, when the adrenaline wears off and everyone goes home? What happens to kids like me?" It was a question Kurt couldn't answer with platitudes or hope. It was a logistical question about systems and safety nets and the grinding reality of abuse that doesn't end when the concert does. "I don't know," Kurt admitted, "but I'm going to find out." And he did. Within a week of that Chicago show, Kurt had contacted lawyers, social workers, and advocacy groups. He began quietly funding safe houses and counseling programs. He never publicized it, never made it part of his public persona. It was just something he did, the way other people pay electric bills or take out trash. The letter, written in blood, stayed in Kurt's guitar case for years afterward, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important music happens when you stop singing and start listening, that sometimes saving one person's life is worth more than entertaining 1,000. But Emma's influence went deeper than Kurt initially realized. In the months that followed, he found himself writing differently. His lyrics became less about his own pain and more about the pain he'd witnessed in others. Songs about children who fell through cracks, about voices that went unheard, about the systems that failed the most vulnerable. Emma Rodriguez survived that night, and many nights after. She graduated high school, went to college, became a social worker specializing in child abuse cases, and every year, on the anniversary of that Chicago show, she sent Kurt a letter, this time written in regular ink, thanking him for teaching her that her voice mattered. But she wasn't the only one changed by that evening. Years later, Kurt would look back on that snowy night in Chicago as the moment he understood what fame could actually be useful for, not just for making music, but for amplifying the voices of those who needed to be heard, for turning a moment of entertainment into a moment of intervention. The venue still stands, though it's changed hands several times. Tony, the owner, eventually created a scholarship fund in Emma's name for kids aging out of foster care. And somewhere on the back wall, written in faded marker, are the words Emma scrawled after the show. Survived 12/15/92. It wasn't loud music anymore, just a fragile reminder that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages, that sometimes a letter written in blood becomes an invitation to live, and that sometimes, in the space between a broken string and a healed heart, real music finally begins to play.